Hey everyone, appreciate you stopping by. Today I'm going to be helping you get started in this awesome game called Predecessor. I'm going to try and break down each role with a few strategies and tips, along with a quick complete beginner's guide to help the new players get started so you can hit the ground running. There's going to be a little bit for everyone in this video, so even if you're a veteran, there very well may be a strategy you haven't been implementing yet. And one last thing before we get started, I'd appreciate any feedback or tips on improving my content going forward, and just let me know the parts you liked or didn't like. And with that being said, let's get right into it. So I'm going to start off with a quick rundown of the main menu so you know what everything is and does. I'm going to start from right to left. By either clicking or using start and select on console, you can access the game's options and social screens so you can add your friends on any supported system. Above that, you'll see your party tab, which shows you any players currently in your party as well as your online friends. Above that, you can see your player card, which you can customize, and I'll show you how to do that in just a sec. But next to that is your player level. Next to the player level is your currency, the main one being Platinum, which you purchase with real-world currency to unlock skins, Hero Affinity, which I'll cover in just a second, and Hero Bundles to skip the unlocking process. If you're not ready to drop any money on the game, though, that's fine, as the secondary passively earned currency is called Amber, and that's underneath the Platinum. Currently, Amber is only used for unlocking heroes, but the devs have mentioned expanding its uses in the future, so keep an eye on that. Then, going across the top of the screen, there's your Watch tab. There you can go back and replay all your game highlights so you can reflect on why it was a bad idea to go Kai Jungle and Pogo Stick on any living organism within 15 feet of you. Next to that is your Profile tab. Here you can change your profile icon, your jump pad trails, recall animation, profile banner, and custom sprays that you can put anywhere on the map in the game, kind of like CSGO sprays. Next to that is the item list. If you're new, I would highly recommend looking through here and checking out what each item does. You can sort it by role type, and it'll help you understand the items a lot more going into your first PvP game. Next to that is the store tab. Here you can purchase any of the locked heroes to use whenever you want outside of the rotations, either with Platinum or with Amber. You can also purchase your skins, hero bundles, as well as the premium Platinum currency. Next is probably the most useful tab here, and it's the hero overview screen. You can check out every hero's abilities, their skins, and their hero affinity. I'd recommend going through each hero and looking at what they do and creating a list in the order you'd like to unlock them. During each role overview, I will be giving a few recommendations for starter heroes in each role so you're not lost and you have a good idea of who to look at. To quickly touch on the affinity system, when you click on a hero and navigate to their affinity tab, you can see two different reward paths. This system is sort of similar to a battle pass system in that the top row is free and passively earned while you play the hero. But let's say you really like a certain character and you want to flex on your puny base skinned opponent. You can buy their hero affinity tree to both unlock the bottom row of rewards, but it also gives you an extra 30% bonus XP for that hero to help you unlock items faster. The system is subject to change in the future, so don't get too attached to it or worked up over how it is right now. It's just a nice way to help you get a goal to work towards. The mastery skins are mwah. Lastly, we have the play screen. Pretty self-explanatory, but it's basically just the home screen tab. Below that, when you hit play, it will start your queue for the selected game mode, which you can see underneath the play button. If you click on the change mode tab, you can change the game mode to PvP, player versus AI, practice, where you can try out specific builds on your hero and test out your damage outputs. Then for all new players, I would recommend playing the tutorial. I will point out though, the biggest criticism of this game from what I've gathered is the, we'll just say not great onboarding process for new players. It'll teach you some stuff, but honestly not enough to help you really understand what's going on behind the scenes, so I'll also be covering those in the next part. If you're an experienced mobile player, you're probably good to hop right into PvP after getting the feel for your hero, because most of the same rules apply in Predecessor. If you're new though, I would recommend starting the tutorial and then play at minimum probably 10 to 15 games of player versus AI before going into PvP. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, you're probably going to get completely dunked on for a while in most likely every role. Try all the roles, see which ones you like, and keep the game chat off because you'll most likely get flamed by Salty Steve's Dorito Dust Hands of Haste, and we honestly just don't need his negativity in our lives, right? Then to cap it all off, we have the developer news at the bottom left. Next, I'm going to be going over a few vital points that new players absolutely need to understand to avoid frustration. I want to quickly touch on a few gameplay essentials for beginners because they're not explained very well, but they're vital to the core gameplay in Predecessor. I've personally witnessed several players in my games complain about these things, and it's hard to explain to someone in-game in real time, so I want to address them here, and hopefully anyone that has this experience will be better equipped to counter it going going forward. The number one biggest noob killing mechanic I've noticed so far with the influx of new players is knowing how to play from behind and when to fight versus when not to fight. This game is very easy to get into and understand on the surface, but much more difficult to master. At high ranks, the biggest thing separating people from elite level of gameplay is usually those micro blunders so seemingly small, most new players probably would miss them. Literally something as small as a missed auto attack could make or break how a game ends up turning out if you have 10 people that know exactly what they're doing. With that being said, I see it happen in almost every game on one team or another, so it's a very common issue. Without fail, there will be something like a Shinbi who goes to the lane against Grux in solo, die in the first 2 minutes because she doesn't know about Grux's bleed and his massive early game schlong whipping everyone into submission. So what does she do? Right after spawning, goes right back into lane, dives headfirst into his wave and a half of minions, Grux, who's now half an item up on you, and you get deleted from existence. Then you say, well shit, maybe third time's the charm. No Shinbi. Third time's certainly not the charm. Basically, all you're doing is helping him turn into fucking Rambo so you can leave your lane early and contribute more at objectives, helping them eventually win the game, and then you proceed to rage quit because the game is unbalanced and stupid. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way though. You can't win every game, and eventually you need to know when it's time to be extra careful and play from behind. When I say that, I mean do things like make sure you ward any potential ganking lanes, position yourself in a way that will give you more time to react to a gank, such as keeping as far away from the jungle fog wall as possible, and do not take any risks. Don't venture far from your nearest tower, check the map before clearing a minion wave, but most importantly, don't continue to feed someone who has an advantage on you. One more quick thing to note on that, while kills are important, they're far less important than almost everyone makes them out to be. I've had games where our team got 60 plus combined kills and we still lost because of stupid misplays, because at the end of the day, you can have 10,000 kills, but if your core gets destroyed, you're still gonna lose. Objectives and good team play are literally the bread and butter of this game. The entire game revolves around planning and coordinating the best ways to secure that objective. Yes, kills help in the sense that you can build your items faster, but if you're on the losing side of that gold battle, maybe it'll take 20 minutes of careful planning to come back, but eventually you'll catch up because the enemy team caps out at 5 items and a tonic. At about 30 minutes in, almost everyone should be at full build. At that point, it all comes down to trying to catch the enemy team lacking, creating opportunities to secure Orb Prime and Primal Fangtooth to give you that small edge in the fighting and let you siege their towers as a team. So with that being said, if you happen to lose to your opponent early, or it seems like the enemy jungler has just pitched a tent right behind your lane's fog wall, play a little bit more passively and do not give them another kill. They have a power advantage on you at that moment, and you most certainly will not be able to just W key into them and expect to win. So getting into roles and their responsibilities, I'm going to be going in the general order of which I would recommend learning, but obviously don't take that as me telling you what to do. Pick whichever role you like and start dunking. I'm starting out with the support role because this is definitely the most beginner-friendly role. Typically, you're not going to be doing much damage, and your main responsibility is to keep your ADC alive. ADCs are also called a carry and are used interchangeably. I'll give a few item tips in a second, but your biggest responsibility as a support is to simply do your best and help your fellow teammates instead of dealing damage to the enemy team. In the early game, it's mostly your responsibility to help open up opportunities for your ADC to deal damage and kill your laning opponents by stunning or poking them with your abilities. It's not quite as simple as point and click in most situations though. It's important to be aware and know when it's a good idea to poke. As a support in the first 5 to 10 minutes, try and time using your abilities towards the end of each minion wave, because once you damage an enemy hero, the minions are going to aggro on you and start attacking you. And they do deal a significant amount of damage in that time frame, so if you dive headfirst into the start of a minion wave trying to poke their support or carry, you're going to end up taking significantly more damage and likely even die, because the second you damage the enemy hero, those minions will start bitch slapping you into your place. It's also not necessarily your responsibility, but I make it mine as a support because typically it's easier for me to look at the map more since I don't have to worry about securing last hits, and that is to call out when enemies leave their lane so the rest of your team knows to be a little bit more careful. Another quick point to make is do not take your ADC's minion last hits unless they're either backed or in another lane. They need as much gold as possible because they're the most powerful hero in the game. In the right hands, the faster they get all their items, the better. Usually. One last small thing in relation to your ability usage and map awareness is don't just spam your abilities for the sake of using them. So many times I'll face a support who just tries to stun me every time the ability goes off cooldown, but when they miss, it's a huge opportunity for me to retaliate with my abilities. Every situation is different, so it's hard to give examples, but over time you'll know when the best time to use an ability is and how to minimize the chances of being retaliated against. In terms of build items, I'll give a few solid examples that work on almost any hero, but you can also use the recommended items as they're curated for each hero generally and are solid items for that. For our crests, 100% of the games as a support, you're going to pick either the Consort crest or the Guardian crest. Each crest will upgrade twice. The first time it's going to give you a small bonus to a variety of stats depending on which one you picked. The second upgrade will let you pick from 3 different evolved crests. Again, I would highly recommend just checking out what each one does and making a decision based off that, but a solid general choice for each crest is either Tranquility, which evolves from the Consort crest, and when activated, it'll give you and your allies near you a small burst of health, which can be helpful sometimes, but it's not really anything to write home about. Or, evolving from Guardian crest, Leaf Song will make yourself and nearby allies gain a burst of movement speed for a few seconds, as well as making them immune to being slowed for the duration. If you check the bottom right side of your screen in-game after selecting your crest, it will explain what action is needed to upgrade it. Each role has a different crest requirement and will vary a little between each crest and role. A few notable support items though that can work on basically any support character are Marshall, which will give you and any allies in an aura around you increased attack speed. This will basically just help you and anyone near you deal a little bit more damage. Another one is Hexbound Bracers, which will give you a decent chunk of armor as well as significantly reducing your cooldown timers and giving you a lot more mana so you can use your abilities more often. For some solid beginner support heroes, I would recommend probably either Narbash or Decker. Decker has a lot of CC, which is short for crowd control, with her cage ability, the bubble stun, and her ultimate ability. Her passive jump ability also gives her tons of verticality and survivability potential. When paired with the item Galaxy Greaves, you can double jump in different directions, making it extremely difficult for the enemy to track you, and just overall is a very fun and my personal favorite support hero. Narbash is also a very solid choice though, being a little bit more tanky than Decker and offering a very substantial AoE healing effect, which can be beneficial in the early game to help you and your ADC stay in lane longer. Also, having 2 forms of CC with his stun and ultimate can be very beneficial when used in team fights. He also has a movement speed ability for both yourself and all nearby allies, helping them either close or open gaps between the enemies, making him another solid choice in almost any game. Next up, we have the solo laner. If you like brawling it out 1v1 with and against some of Predecessor's thickest boys, then solo lane is for you. Traditionally, this role will be a melee bruiser type hero, and your main responsibilities are pretty straightforward. 1. Kick your opponent's ass. 2. Create pressure in your lane by making sure the minions are pushing towards their side of the map. And 3. Time your backs with objective spawns, mainly Fangtooth, so you can help your team secure them and win. Since Fangtooth is on the opposite side of the map, it makes rotating a little bit harder because if the enemy knows their shit, the second they see you sprinting across mid lane headed towards Fang, they immediately will know what's up and start setting up a defense. That's why I mentioned trying to time your backs for when they spawn. If you manage to beat your opponent in the beginning laning phase, it creates a much better opportunity for you, as the enemy will likely think that you're just buying your items and regenerating your health. Let your team know while you're backing to group up and attack Fangtooth using the in-game ping system. I'm not going to cover the ping system in this video, but let me know if you'd like me to walk you through it. It's pretty self-explanatory though, and just requires practice to know where the pings are. Sometimes, well, honestly, most of the time, not everyone is going to be on the same page, especially if you're in solo queue. Just keep an eye on the map, and if your jungler looks like he's making his way over there, head over with him and help secure it. If not, and he's busy on the opposite side of the map, well, you still get an A for effort. I also see a lot of people start trying to take the Cayenne buff just because they push my lane into tower. This is risky though, as if you try and take it while the enemy solo is still in lane, they have almost just as much of a chance to come over and steal it with one of their abilities at the last second as you do securing it. I always try and make sure my opponent is either visible in another lane on the map or he just backed for sure. That way, the only thing you have to worry about is a jungler gank, which is extremely rare in that situation. Arguably though, the most important part about effectively soloing is wave control. I didn't mention it in the support role because they're the only role exempt from securing last hits on minions. Your number #1 priority at the beginning of the game is securing minion last hits. Even if you manage to kill your opponent in lane, you'll get between 100 and 300 gold depending on several factors. Each minion wave though, assuming you secure every last hit on them, will grant you around 100 gold, so essentially every 2 to 3 minion waves is a kill's worth of gold. This is something that's so commonly overlooked in my games because people think kills are the biggest stat that matters. We aren't playing Call of Duty, so kills, like I said before, really don't matter as much as people make them out to. Typically when I play solo, I'll try and bait my opponent into using his abilities and ideally missing them, and then immediately taking that time his abilities are on cooldown to retaliate with mine. Don't expect to immediately kill him after using this tactic though. Usually it'll take 3 to 4 successful attempts at poking your opponent down, and then you can make a move at killing them. Remember though, especially in the first few minutes of the game, the minions will aggro you right when you damage their hero, and they're not to be underestimated. Another strategy that's related to lane control is know when to push and when to quote-unquote freeze your lane. Freezing a lane is when you don't damage the minions in lane at all, or at least as little as possible. Simply stand there and wait for the minion's health bar to turn red and then auto-attack it to secure the kill. If you don't wait until the health bar turns red, you likely won't secure the kill. You'll get the full amount of XP from the minion, but receive 0 gold, which is why it's essential to secure as many last hits as possible in every role besides support. One last tip for new players that I see happen all the time, that I sort of touched on in the beginning, is to not fight an enemy that has a power advantage on you in a 1v1. Many experienced solo laners will play passive until the second they hit level 3 and then quote-unquote all in you by dumping their whole kit on you in the minion wave, typically dealing a shit ton of damage. If they beat you by even 1 minion to that next level, they passively gain a small amount of a bunch of different stats like health, damage, and armor, which means they'll easily outdamage you and bully you out of lane. This will inevitably happen from time to time in every game. The important part is minimizing how many times it happens, because every time you have to back, it means you're missing out on that juicy farm. For offlane crests, if you're building someone super tanky like Sevarog or Steel, you'll want to use the Titan crest, which again evolves once, giving you a small stat boost, and then again into 3 options. The most all-around solid one would probably be Razorback, as when it's activated, you'll get extra armor and reflect a portion of any damage dealt to you back to the dealer. If you're playing more of a bruiser build like Greystone or Zaris though, the Warrior crest is usually the go-to. Its evolved form is honestly just a personal hero preference, as they're all quite good for this one. Phoenix crest basically gives you another life with about a third of your health back, but it's also quite a hefty cooldown, and you can't activate it if you're CC locked. Icecorn Talons is quite good, as it gives a large AoE that gives you extra movement speed and damage, as well as slowing the enemy heroes around you, making it harder for them to run away or close a gap to you. Then one more crest option if you're picking a solo laner that deals magic damage such as Shinbi or Quang. You'll want to use the Occult crest and almost always evolve it into Tempest, which gives you a personal thunderstorm around you, helping you deal more damage. For some beginner offlane heroes, I would recommend either Grux or Greystone. Grux is an early game menace and the bane of many players' existence because he's quite tanky but also hits like a truck due to his passive bleed ability and his kit, which basically turns you into a pinball machine at his will. Greystone doesn't have as much CC but can deal some pretty significant damage with the bruiser build, and due to him having a second life with his ultimate makes him very annoying to actually deal with and kill. I'm also going to mention Steel here just because he has so much CC and is very, very hard to kill when built as a tank. He's another very solid pick in the offlane as a beginner. For some staple offlane items, you'd be hard-pressed to pass up on Fire Blossom, which deals consistent passive damage and an AoE around you based off how much maximum health you have, making it a staple bruiser build item on almost anyone. Another great one though is Overlord, which will help you deal extra damage and a small AoE around your auto attacks, as well as giving you additional physical power based on your health. This item will up your wave clear potential significantly. Next up, we have the mid lane. Mid lane can be a little bit scary for new players because you're surrounded on both sides by potential ganking lanes, making you a slightly easier target for the enemy jungler or roaming gank, which is why it's also in the middle of my list. With a little bit of experience, decent awareness, and using your wards though, you can significantly reduce the overall danger of playing in the mid lane. Your average mid lane pick will be a magical based hero with strong wave clear and powerful abilities. Your role is typically a little bit similar to the carry in that you'll be dealing significant amounts of damage, but you're also going to be relatively squishy. And since you don't have a support hero with you in your lane, again, this role becomes a little bit more tricky. Some effective strategies I've come up with are at the very beginning of the game, again, make sure you're securing as many last hits as possible, but position yourself at the top right of the mid lane stairs, not in the river, but on the platform above it. Basically, just sit there and auto-attack the first few waves of minions until you're level 2 or 3, and then start trying to poke your laning opponent a little bit while keeping either on top or to the right of your mid lane stairway. If you stick to the right side, the jungler will most likely try and gank you from the left after they've cleared their red side jungle so they can get the river buff from you. The river buffs spawn at each odd minute starting at 3, and they will give you a variety of small boosts for a time period as well as regenerating a large portion of your mana, so securing these is essential to stay in lane longer. Another super important part to help keep you safer in the mid lane is to place your ward outside the nearest jungle fog wall to you. This way, if he's on the closer jungle side to you, you'll have more time to react, and since you're positioned as far away from the other side fog wall, you'll have more time to react and escape if you see them coming from there. Your main responsibilities as a mid laner will be again to kick your opponent's ass, but also to help either of the other two lanes on either side of you by occasionally stopping by for a gank of your own. Again, knowing when to do these things is important because any time you're spending away from lane is less time getting soul. So for me, a good time to gank is either if the enemy duo lane is pushed forward to our side of the map, or if the solo laner is less than half health, I'll see if I can make anything happen. Because if you gank but don't get a kill, you lost out on a decent chunk of farm and fall behind a little. Then of course, helping your team anytime there's an opening to secure an objective. This is basically a universal tip because securing those objectives should be #1 priority and responsibility for the first 20 minutes of the game for every role, because they give a huge team-wide boost when secured. Really though, the hardest part about playing mid lane is avoiding the ganks. Sometimes it might feel like the entire enemy team just has a special hatred for you, but in reality it's just the way the map is laid out, and naturally the mid lane is going to get the most traffic overall. So minimizing your deaths, showing up at team fights to dump your kit on the enemy team and delete them from existence are your key responsibilities. Crest-wise, you'll almost always be using the Magician's Crest, evolving into another 3 great picks that all come down to preference. Epoch makes you invincible, but also unable to move or attack for a few seconds. Soulbearer, which I personally like, but I feel like it needs a buff to either have more of a shield or a shorter cooldown because it just feels a little underwhelming, but basically it just gives you a temporary shield to absorb some damage. Some staple mid lane items are Megacosm, which will apply a damage over time effect to any enemy hit with your abilities. Just makes them more potent, but also pads your mana pool a little bit. Another one is Wraith Leggings, which gives you extra movement speed anytime you damage an enemy hero specifically with any ability. This makes you much faster and able to either get away or close a gap easier. Probably the 2 most noob-friendly mid lane heroes are either Gideon or Morgesh. Gideon is good because he has a built-in teleport ability, which when paired with your blink can make you a very hard gank. His abilities, however, are a little bit harder to hit and master. Morgesh is the opposite though. Her abilities are much easier to land, but she lacks the same mobility as Gideon. With Morgesh, your main source of damage comes from marking your enemies and then throwing some fucking bees at them. The bees are a little harder to aim because it's basically just a grenade that you toss out, but your mark ability has a very short cooldown, locks onto enemies, so it's basically 0 IQ to land it, and it deals significant damage. She does have a little mobility with her secondary, as she will get a burst of speed and can pass through enemy heroes or minions and will regain a chunk of health by passing through them, but it's not nearly as potent as Gideon's teleport, so positioning is much more important with Morgesh. Next, we have one of the more important roles in my opinion in the ADC. Because of how much rides on your shoulders as you being the team's main source of damage, but also being made of paper mache, it makes this role a little bit harder, especially because you don't start dealing that damage until the end game. A traditional carry will be a very potent, but again, very squishy hero who relies on their ranged basic attacks to deal huge chunks of damage to the enemy. Normally, you're going to have a little bit less range than a caster, which means positioning is absolutely crucial for your success as an ADC. This also means though that it's important for your team to help keep you alive. Any good team will know to instantly focus the carry because it doesn't take much to kill them, and with them out of the fight, it means significantly less damage can be dealt, giving them a huge advantage. Your main responsibilities as an EDC, on top of helping your team at objectives and securing last hits, which is most important in this role, you'll also be working with your support to try and create, but also capitalize on damage opportunities to force your opponent out of lane and be able to safely secure the gold buff. The gold buff is located on the very far side of your lane and gives whoever secures it a nice chunk of gold, so planning around securing that buff in lane should always be in the back of your mind. On the topic of positioning, which to me is the most important skill as an ADC, next to just being able to aim and land your autos, if you have good positioning, it will make you a nearly unstoppable force to be reckoned with. A good, well-fed ADC with good positional awareness could quite literally wipe out an entire enemy team in a matter of seconds, which is why in late game fights, everyone on both teams' target number one needs to be the ADC. Ideally, when attacking an enemy, you'll want to make sure either your support or at least another teammate is around to help protect you. Also, when you're in a team fight or near any enemy with CC, try and keep them at a very edge of your auto range and always be ready to turn your ass around and run as fast as you can. The millisecond things start to get hairy, you need to get the hell out of there fast. Again, I'll put an asterisk here because sometimes it's necessary to try and stick it out and help deal a little bit more damage before leaving or even getting taken out. Most of these situations, again, will just come with experience, but I want to give you some good starting points to help recognize them easier. The carry role is relatively straightforward, besides again the things I mentioned previously being a part of every role like objectives. You came here to drink beer and fuck shit up. And we're all out of beer. The two main carriers I would look into as a beginner are Kira or Wraith. Some of you might look at me weird for suggesting Wraith, but hold on, let me explain. For a while, I hated Wraith because I thought he was just hot garbage. Turns out, I was just suffering from a chronic skill issue because he was actually insanely goated when used right. Now, I'm not gonna lie, he definitely is harder than most of the other carriers, but that's why I'd recommend Kira secondly. Let me gush on Wraith for a second though and give you the down low. His lack of adaptability makes positioning again super important with Wraith, but his kit gives him the ability to deal some serious damage from a pretty big distance. His snipe ability will refund 100% of the mana cost and decrease the cooldown 2 seconds by securing either a kill or a minion last hit, which makes him great at clearing minions when you get the hang of the damage for each level. His snipe also super useful if you start getting bullied out of lane because you can sit halfway across the whole lane and just snipe the minions from relative safety. It's a little bit more tricky to land the last hits with the snipe, but again, it just comes down to practice. His main source of damage will come from using his Q ability, landing your snipe, and then landing a second snipe 2 seconds after. This has the power to basically delete people, and the fact that the snipe can go through walls means escaping is next to impossible. Again, this is assuming that you can land your snipes though. Personally, Wraith is my favorite ADC, so I'm probably just biased, but I put him in here because I think he's really slept on. If you use him a couple times, eventually you'll get the hang of it and he becomes an absolute beast. I also put Kira instead of Twin Blast because they both have a dash ability to help bail you out of some bad positioning, or sometimes to help you secure a kill if it's just out of range. I think Kira is a little stronger though for a beginner because overall I just think Twin Blast has a higher skill ceiling because he relies a bit more on landing harder to hit abilities. Kira's Q ability to deal that extra bit of damage if your opponent gets away with a sliver of their health makes her another hard to get away from hero you certainly don't want to mess with. As for the crests, it will vary a bit depending on which hero you pick, but almost all carries can benefit well from the Sharpshooter crest. This evolves into my personal favorite, being Pacifier. This gives you a small dash and also empowers your next basic attack to do extra damage. The crest will also reset its cooldown timer if you get a kill after using the crest, making it amazing at chaining and securing kills as a fed ADC. Another good one though is Liberator. If you're going against a team with a ton of CC, Liberator instantly cleanses you of any CC or debuffs like a Grux Bleed and gives you a small shield. CC is your kryptonite as a carry because it makes you a stationary punching bag for the entire enemy team for a few seconds. Being able to instantly cleanse those effects at the push of a button can become almost invaluable at certain moments though. Builds vary for ADCs so much depending on many factors. For example, a Wraith build will look almost nothing like a Kira build, so I'm not really going to mention any specifics here. Again though, if you generally follow the suggested items for each hero, they'll be pretty solid. Just experiment and see which ones you like best. Last but certainly not least, we come to the absolutely fearless Giga Chads of every MOBA. The jungler. No matter what anyone ever tries to tell you, the jungler is by far the most important role. This is mostly due to the fact that you just straight up have way more responsibility than any other role. You're a babysitter for your own team while being Jason fucking Bourne to the enemy. A good jungler will have every single enemy lane scared to come out of their tower for fear their health bar will disappear faster than they can say,
Oh shit.
One of the most important parts about being a jungler is good timing. Knowing when certain things happen around the map and prioritizing them based off the circumstances is what separates low tier from high tier junglers. Your main responsibilities are constantly ganking each and every lane, as well as trying to take any opportunities to steal your opponent's jungle, which means more for you and less for them. Your main priority, though, is objectives. You alone should dictate when, why, and how to secure an objective, but this is also why timing is important. Being a good jungler is very hard because you're constantly having to juggle multiple things at once. Even if you're the most efficient farmer, you'll eventually fall behind on farm if you only focus on clearing your camps. This incentivizes junglers to constantly look for and create ganking opportunities throughout your farming route to supplement extra gold and XP. My very first farming route as a jungler in the early game will be something like this. Before the game starts, run over to your blue buff and place a ward down on it right at the 1 minute mark when the minions spawn. Then immediately after placing the ward, hit the back button and go back to your fountain. Then, in the item shop, go to the vision tab at the top and replace your ward with a sentry ward. The sentry ward is essential on junglers because when activated, it will reveal all enemy wards in its radius, allowing you to destroy them so the enemy will no longer be alerted to your presence, letting you gank them easier. After grabbing your sentry ward, head over to your red buff. Clear the red buff first, which will get you to level 2. A quick tip here is there's a small arrow about 1/8 of the way down the minion's health bar. Once their health bar reaches that arrow, it will highlight it, meaning that you're able to use your jungle-specific item slot called Smite to instantly deal 500 damage to the minion and kill it. Then, after the red buff, I head to the 5 camp. Clear that, but before heading to the 2 camp, I'll quickly stop into the nearest lane and use my sentry ward to scan the area near the fog wall and destroy any wards the enemy has placed. If I notice a ward is there, I won't actually gank the lane because they can see me, but by destroying it, they'll be more paranoid. I'll return after my 2 camp and it'll throw them off a little bit because wards have a very long cooldown to use. Then, after either ganking or dewarding that nearest lane, I'll clear out my 2 camp, and if you're quick, you'll be just in time for the river buff to come up. You'll be able to see if the enemy mid laner is going to try and come down to grab the buff, so either make sure you're right next to it when it spawns and secure it with an ability, or alternatively, you can wait for the enemy mid lane to try and drop down and get it, and then use your abilities on them instead to try and get a kill, or at least make them use their blink. After that, depending on how much health I have, I'll either go directly to the blue side jungle and do a full clear of those camps and possibly gank that lane, or just back and then do the full clear. After that, it's basically just rotating back and forth between the sides, quickly clearing your camp, but always looking around, checking the map, looking for gank opportunities so that you can secure an objective. Typically, anytime a fight results in the jungler's death post about 8 minutes into the game, will allow the opposing team to more safely take an objective because of the jungler-specific item Smite. This is your most important tool as a jungler because only you and the enemy jungler have them, and they work on the boss objectives to deal 500 and then 1000 damage after being evolved like a crest. One of the best strategies to secure an objective is to wait until the enemy is down at minimum 1 person, preferably their jungler, and ensure they're going to be gone at least long enough to take the objective. If the enemy is only down 1 or 2 people, you'll have to be more stealthy because the enemy team still could collapse and at minimum disrupt your ability to secure it, so the more downed enemies the better. Then you'll ideally group as many teammates as possible to the objectives to steal as much damage as possible. Once it's down to either 500 or 1000 health, depending which level of Smite, immediately use it to deal a huge chunk of damage to the boss and secure it, so the enemy can't use something like a global Murdoch snipe to potentially steal it at the last second, which is very possible if your jungler isn't present. Because you have the most responsibilities and nearly every lane will rely on you to help them relieve pressure from their opponent by damaging or killing them, you'll also be the most susceptible to flaming from your teammates, unfortunately. This is why, especially as a beginner, I would recommend keeping chat off, as even when you're doing good and what you're supposed to, it's still a team game and you can't do it all yourself. There will be games where you just can't keep up and every single one of your lanes is just getting completely stomped, which will inevitably cause you to fall behind and get blamed for things that really aren't your fault. Just don't take it to heart and ignore them if you're someone that happens to enjoy chatting, as sometimes there are some wholesome and nice moments that happen in the chat. The jungle easily has the most diverse number of heroes played in it, so again, the diversity here is very vast and subjective. Basically, any melee hero can play jungle effectively given the right circumstances. The 2 main ones I would start with, though, are Chimera and Quang. Chimera is definitely the easier of the two, as he's solely dedicated to being a jungler hero who thrives at regenerating crazy amounts of health by stacking his abilities on other enemy heroes, or specifically the jungle minions. He's also the only jungler, to my knowledge, that can solo Fangtooth at exactly the 5-minute mark, so keeping Fangtooth warded against an enemy Chimera is a must. Quang is also very strong because of his long-range sword tether, but admittedly it's quite harder to land and takes a bit of practice to become effective with. He does, however, benefit from very good clearing speed and the ability to surprise any laner from quite the distance with his sword tether that can also be comboed with his other abilities for additional effects, makes him very scary. For items, again, because of the wide range of heroes available to be played in the jungle, it will vary a lot, but basically anything that will help you clear minions faster, like Mind Razor on a physical based hero, or something like Lifebinder and Fire Blossom for a magic based jungler like Quang. So those are the basics for each role, with a few strategies I use along with them to hopefully help you understand some lesser explained mechanics, and I hope these help you reach your next level of gameplay. If you'd like me to dig deeper into a specific subject, do let me know though, as these are pretty basic, and I left some other less relevant things out that I'll cover in a future video, like the item system and counter building. All the footage you saw in the video was pulled directly from my live streams. If you'd like to check out some live gameplay, I stream on Twitch every day besides Tuesday and Thursday starting at 4 p.m. Next, I plan on making a bunch of short hero overview videos to deep dive into each and every character to help you get a detailed idea of good builds and strategies. Again though, just any general feedback you have on what you'd like to see would be very well received and appreciated. Even negative, as it will help me improve my future content. If you found this video helpful, I'd appreciate any support you could give to help continue motivating me to bring videos like this to you. Just the obvious YouTube stuff, especially since I started doing this, every little thing is huge. Thanks a bunch, and I'll see you in the next one.